Hey kids, and welcome to the show. Today I'm going to be talking to you guys about radical fundamentalism within the Catholic Church. Yeah, well, fundamentalism can be scary in any faith denomination, whether that's Catholic, Muslim, Mormon, Baptist, whatever. If you take a fundamental view of your faith, which means what is written is what you teach, you're going to be in for a really unpleasant life. Why do I say that? Well, first off, I read my Bible every day. Well, mostly every day. That was a mess. I got some drawings up there. I got my little Bible here. And the great thing about this Bible is there are a lot of pages in this book. And the great thing is there's a lot of great advice in the Bible. It's a great place to turn for words of encouragement, inspiration. It's a great book. The trouble is, you can prove anything with that Bible. You can prove any sin is okay. You can prove any sin is evil just by plucking a single scripture out of context. That's how I learned my faith growing up. And I have some issues with some of my leaders. However, one of the things that one of my youth leaders once said was, you have to look at the context. Because people will say that we teach something and it's just a little true. And some people will say, this scripture proves that this church is wrong. And that scripture was just pulled out of context. And it literally says the exact opposite. And then you have people who think that because what they learned from someone once seemed to be true to them, that is the ultimate and only truth. Well, it starts to get scary when you start to think you have the only truth. One of the reasons I'm Catholic is because I like the regimen. I like the organization of the church. I like that when I walk in, I know where I'm at. If I'm late for mass, I know exactly how much of the mass I missed. Let's say I get there 15 minutes late and they've already done the readings. Well, I can listen to that sermon, and then after mass, I can open that Bible up and read those readings. I know what they were. I love that I can travel any place in the world and walk into a church and know where I'm at. The problem is, having traveled as much as I have into different countries, I've gotten to see Catholics from different countries. And my spirituality reflects my experiences. And my experiences is that even though I was raised in a very orthodox, kind of wanting that Latin, my experience has been that the most faithful people can't. Because it takes education to be able to understand Latin. And I'm not saying intelligence, I'm saying education. And most people don't have time to learn a new language. If they did, they'd probably learn Spanish. I mean, that's just the reality. You learn Spanish, you get paid more. Most people are not going to learn Latin. And I got to speak to this beautiful person the other day. We were doing a baptism seminar for our baby. And we know what baptism is. Obviously, we've been in the church for a long time. I wanted to learn something. And the only way to learn something is to be open to learning. And this person that was leading the baptism seminar, you know what? Her name is Judy. She might see this video because I did tell her about the show. And she has been in the church for a long time. And the wisdom that she shared that day was some wonderful wisdom that I don't think I've ever received. And, I'm in my 40s, mid 40s, 44, I think, or 45, one of those. My daughter can tell you, I think it's 44. Anyway, she has a wisdom that I can just hope to have. But she started to tell some stories about herself before Vatican II. Vatican II was a big council, the church, they came together, made some new rules. One of the biggest ones was they stopped doing the prayers in Latin, and the priest turned around and he used to face the altar and not the congregation. And the reason for that was because the priest was supposed to be celebrating with the people. That's the idea of that. They decided to turn it to make it a little more friendly. And sometimes you just need to make things more friendly. And they also let the congregation see the readings. So they used to do everything in Latin. I used to think that everything was in Latin, but really it was just the responses. The homily was still in English or the vernacular. But there was no sign of peace. And in the Catholic Church, around the middle, there's a sign of peace. We used to shake hands or kiss somebody on the cheek or whatever, or give a hug. Now, unfortunately, it's just a, hi, peace, peace, because this COVID garbage. Anyway, they didn't do that. So this young lady, as a child, sat in church, and she said it was just like having blinders on. You weren't allowed to talk to anybody. You had to be really quiet. You couldn't be engaged. You didn't know the Latin. You didn't know any of this stuff. And then she said Vatican II happened, and all of a sudden the priest turned around and boom, she could participate. And not only could she participate, but then she could tell her friends more about her faith, because she was a Catholic, but she couldn't really tell her friends about her faith. And she was talking about how even back then people would accuse Catholics of just horrific things, like to keep it PG or rated G, priests were daddies, nuns were mommies, and they did abortions in the basement, things like that. And this is the greatest thing she said. She said, one of her friends said, how could you be a Catholic when they're doing stuff like this? And then she looked at her friend, she goes, how would you think that I would be a Catholic if we were doing stuff like that? So that gave her the ability to share her faith. So the wisdom that she shares, is so important. And so let's move on. Okay, so let's get back to what the topic is, radical fundamentalism. Why did I mention that story? Well, that story is kind of one of the things that I want people to understand, that if you go back to the way the church was, that's what you're going to get. You're going to get kids like that. And you're going to get kids that don't know their faith. And that's a pretty scary place to be. So where do we see radical fundamentalism? I just learned a new word. It's a new word of something, I don't know. Anyway, there's these people that think the last few popes were not valid. Like, they've been anti-popes or whatever. And basically it's people that think every pope from Vatican II on has been invalid. Because in Vatican II, the church said, we are the universal church and we're going to be open to more people. We're not going to be so closed off, because Christ kind of taught us not to be closed off. So we open the church. We open the accessibility. And what happened? I don't know the exact number. Some people say there was an explosion. Some people say there was an implosion. Some people say that the church schismed, and it depends on who you talk to. I can tell you what happened for me as a 6th grader, 7th grader, 8th grader. I knew the church wasn't evil. I knew they were doing great things in the community. I knew that when I was in high school and I was doing confirmation class, I really liked this Jesus guy. He's pretty cool. And I really liked the saints. And this Pope guy, he's pretty cool too. He can pack a stadium. I never got to meet JP2, John Paul II. I never got to meet Benedict, or haven't yet. Maybe I will one day. I got to see him about 20 feet from me at World Youth Day. And who knows, maybe I'll get to meet St. Francis one day. That would be pretty epic. Anyhow, why am I making this video? I'm making this video because I want my kids to understand that the church, if you are to believe it, okay, and I subscribe to the Catholic teachings. Even if I disagree with them, I only disagree them to the point that I understand that I don't know why. So, does that make sense? We'll talk about that another day. It's a whole another bag of worms. But I want my kids to know that when love stops being the center of your words, when you're saying you are not worthy and you are not worthy and you better go to confession and you better do this, well, that is not being a good Catholic or being a good Christian or being a good person. Because our faith needs to be internal, not external. Your true faith comes with your daily devotion and prayer, not in the words that you spout on Facebook or on Twitter or wherever it is. It's not in saying Pope Francis is an evil socialist Nazi. Yes, I've heard that before. And maybe he likes socialism. Guess what? He's a monarch. That's basically what the Pope is. He's a monarch in Vatican City. Socialism works. If you have a leader that cares about the people, I think it works. People say socialism doesn't work. I'm pretty sure the Vatican is pretty socialist. The Vatican City as a whole. And why does it work? Because you have a leader that cares about the people and not a leader that's just trying to get rich. So socialism is a scary concept. And now there are people that are trying to say he's invalid. American people are saying he's invalid because he agrees with climate change and he believes in social programs. He's the Pope. He's the freaking Pope. He's allowed to believe in social programs. That's what the whole church is about. The church started, its main ministry in the U.S. by providing churches. Well, duh. Providing schools and hospitals. We took care of widows and orphans. Now we build buildings and we still take care of stuff, and we don't do the hospitals and schools like we used to. We still have schools. They are different in that we don't have the vocations that we used to have. So there's no nuns or priests running around the schools, on a daily basis. So it's Catholic school is just a traditional school with a religion class, basically what it's turned into. The requirements are still the same. So the only thing is, I don't think we get as many priests out of the school. And that might be just because of the social economic setup of the parish. Because, much like other countries, priesthood is a viable career option because it's a way to get moving, get out of your household and make a life for yourself, at least a comfortable life where you can live and maybe take care of your parents, So I'm digressing again because fundamentalism is so divisive. And fundamentalism, when it creeps into any group, can be divisive. When fundamentalism creeps into a church, a lot of people in that church are just now searching, just now looking, just now opening their hearts to God. And I'm not saying that there's somebody there who's just been there a week and hasn't understood God. I'm saying there's people there that have been there 30, 40, 50 years. That every moment they walk into that church, they are seeking something. And they are opening themselves up to something. They don't know what, but to something, and they're waiting. And then you interrupt their prayer by saying they're evil and they need to go to confession because they're not living the way you think the church should have them living. And the church isn't doing things that they should be doing. Well, if you don't like the way it's happening, do something about it. I'm not going to tell you to leave. I'm going to tell you to stand up. And instead of ranting on Facebook or Twitter, why don't you go to your priest and say, hey, this isn't right. Oh, are you scared to do it in person? Because I will. I'll tell the priest that I don't like the donation basket and aisle first thing I see when I walk into the church. Doesn't mean he's going to change it, but I'll tell him. Will you stand up for your faith when it's in the public eye? When you stand up to your faith and you're able to look someone in the eye and say, this is truth, And that person can look you in the eye and say, yeah, it sounds like you're right. And maybe you should speak up. The church is not going to fail or fall because of the language at the Mass or which direction the priest is facing in, or who gets to take communion and who doesn't get to take communion. The church is going to fail when the people within the church start looking at each other as adversaries and not allies. Fundamentalism has no place in a loving church. It just doesn't. And I know that there's people out there that are going to be offended by this, but you can't be so letter of the law that you throw people out of the church because their sin's worse than your sin. Well, guess what? It's all sin to God. It's all sin to God. Yeah. It doesn't matter if you can see the sin on the outside. What matters is what God sees. And so often I see so much hate in these people that scream that the Catholic Church is the answer, or they scream that Christianity is the answer. And yet they're filled with rage and hate. And kids, our God is not one of rage and hate. Our God is one of acceptance and one of going out into the world and saying, you know what, here I am. I'm going to do my best to serve you and love you. And I'm not going to judge you for who you are or what you do. Because I am living the truth of Christ. St. Francis said, it's attributed to him, preach the gospel every day and when necessary use words. Well, unfortunately, I use a lot of stinking words. But I try to preach the gospel to my kids in the way I treat them, in the way I love them. It's getting increasingly hard with social media and YouTube and all this stuff just infiltrating everything and all the cultures. And then you have these people that have decided to jump on this weird political tribal train. The tribal train's so crazy and so radical that political leaders can badmouth religious leaders, and followers of those religious leaders agree with the political leaders. Keep in mind, there were 3 people in the Bible who know Scripture backwards and forward. Christ, we know, was one of them. The Pharisees were the other. Oh, there was that bad one. The guy in the desert? Yeah, Satan. Be aware that people can quote Scripture and manipulate you with 99% truth and 1% lie. Know the fruits that come of the things that you do. And if someone is telling you to do something that produces bad fruit or rotten fruit, run. You must understand faith is here, not here. And when your faith is elevated, when you tear other people down, you've missed the mark. Until next time, work hard, be kind, and have fun.